Yes. Oh, is there removed? That's good. Oh, thank you.
Check your emails.
Thank you very much, Olivier. So today it's just a flash session in EuroDIG style, so it's supposed to be only half an hour. And so don't worry, I will not have many slides. Really, I just want to give a very quick overview of the key proposals that were developed for the transition. But really what we want this session to be is an opportunity for anyone to ask pretty much any question that they like to ask around the transition from the IANA team. That includes the CEO and various board members who are here. Maybe you can just say very quickly, IANA team, just say who you are. Say who you are.
Who I am? Oh, what a good question.
Well, maybe less than half an hour.
I don't know this sometimes myself in the morning in particular. So Erika Mann, board member, and I'm based in Brussels most of the time, and maybe that's enough.
Yeah. I'm Elizabeth from Milan. I joined the ICANN board in October. I'm based in Slovenia, and I'm Dutch.
And I'm Andrea Beccaglio. I work for ICANN in based in Brussels office as senior manager for stakeholder engagement.
It's you.
We have a new trainee.
No, I'm not a trainee anymore. I upgraded myself. Jan Morby, I'm the president and CEO of the ICANN section. Happy to be here.
Thank you.
And I'm from Sweden, by the way.
I am Michael Jakoshov, ICANN VP for the eastern part of Europe, based in Moscow, Russia.
Hi, I'm Alexandra Filipova. I'm GSC manager for Central Asia, also based in Moscow. I'm Colin Curry from Internet and Jurisdiction, based in Paris, and I'm American. If we're going for the country theme.
My name is Caroline, and I'm a PhD student here in law at the ULB Université Libre de Bruxelles in Belgium.
I'm Megan Richards. I'm from the European Commission. Explains it.
I am Maria. I am Brazilian, and I am a member of the GENISA representative non-commercial sector.
I'm Christopher Wilkinson. I negotiated the European aspects of the first ICANN transition in 1998 and followed the second transition with great interest. I've read briefly the NTIA report. It's excellent that we reached this stage, finally. It was supposed to take place in the year 2000. I do regret a little bit that NTIA's report did not emphasize the global aspects of the transition. This is not a transition as in privacy of the United States industry. This is a transition to the global multi-stakeholder community.
I'm Professor Giulio di Italian.
Nigel Hickson from ICANN, based in Geneva. Barry Bob, I consult with ICANN, and Arizona.
Hello, my name is Marques. I'm working at
My name's Jim Prendergast with the Galway Strategy Group. I don't think I've ever played it before, but I have dual citizenship, US and Ireland.
My name is Gonzalo de Barajas. I work for Telefonica and I'm from Spain.
My name is Sasha Mildovic. I'm from the University of Sarajevo.
Stefano Trompi from Italy, and I've been for 15 years a member of the GAC for Italy, and then now working with EuroDIG and founder of EuroDIG. Okay.
I'm Olivier Crépin-Leblond. I'm the chair of EuroDIG, the European at-large organization, and I'm holding the webcam, so it's not very steady. So sorry about this.
They'll carry the World Economic Forum.
And at the back, please.
I'm Raphael Bourgain-Lacroix. I work at Internet and Jurisdiction as well, so based in Paris and
okay, hi. I'm Tatiana Schrock, and I live in Germany, and I'm a cybersecurity lawyer.
I'm Farzan Ibaldi. I'm an NCUC member, and I'm originally Iranian, and I live in Germany.
And I'm Tapani Talvainen from Electronic Frontier Finland, and presently also chair of the non-commercial stakeholder group in ICANN.
And
People know what this question. Who you are? I'm Caleb.
Thank you. So it's a very nice audience. Sort of half of the people are from the ICANN, already a part of the ICANN community, and the rest from all over Europe and beyond, and hopefully joining soon the ICANN community. And there's a few more people coming in, but I propose that we just make a start, if you don't mind. I have a few slides, but I'd like to go through them quickly because, as I said, it's really just to give you a quick overview and enable you all to ask questions and exchange on the topic for the short amount of time allotted to us. So, what are the IANA? By the way, this PDF can be made available afterwards, of course, so you can look at all the details. So, the IANA functions have existed for a while. They were run initially by John Postel and a team at the University of Southern California in the 90s, and they're really a repository in a way for 3 key functions or key rule books, if you want to call them that, or databases: the domain names database, the sort of global coordination and allocation of IP numbers, and then the underlying protocol parameters, the 100 or so standards that underpin this system and the key routing of in the domain name system. Now, in 1998, the idea was that as the internet was growing fast, there needed to be a bit more of a stable structure, a longer-term sustainable structure for handling all this, and was passed on from the University of Southern California to a dedicated organization, which was ICANN, which transitioning, as Christopher said, from non-existence to existence in 1998. It was the first transition. So ICANN was created to perform, amongst other things, the IANA functions, and that's worked through a no-cost contract with the US Department of Commerce for over 15 years. Why the US Department of Commerce? Because back in the 60s, it was the US government that had funded the series of research projects which eventually became or gave birth to the internet. And so there was always the US government in the background overseeing this project. And then we move on to, it was always thought about in 1998, if you look back at the documents forming ICANN, that the US government would keep an eye on ICANN for a few years, and once the organization had matured, they would pass on their oversight role. And this is what they decided to, or what they said they intended to do on the 14th of March of 2014. And they asked ICANN to facilitate effectively a global consultation of the multi-stakeholder community worldwide around how to transition the oversight role and stewardship over the IANA functions to the global multi-stakeholder community. And that stewardship is very much to basically check that there's good performance of the IANA functions. It's like a service level agreement if you're in the IT world. That's what they've been doing for the past few years. And so the idea was, how do we transition that to this global multi-stakeholder community? The 2 tracks happened. The main track was, basically to design the mechanism that would replace this no-cost contract, this oversight relationship between ICANN and the NTIA, and a parallel track which was about making sure that we have robust, good practice governance and accountability mechanisms like ICANN, so that when there is this new mechanism, when the US government goes away, the organization is so structured that the multi-stakeholder community can truly exercise its oversight role, and that there are the right checks and balances for the decision, the oversight to be done effectively. And so a number of working groups were put together to take forward those 2 key tracks. And this is a very high-level summary, I warned you. Just a quick illustration of maybe some of the key aspects. On the left, the current contract between NTIA and ICANN. With the IANA team at the bottom, you can see it's a functionally separated team within ICANN. They've got their own little partitioned office in the ICANN headquarters in Los Angeles. And the big change when we move to post-transition is that IANA becomes a legal entity, but which will become a subsidiary of ICANN. So it's got much more of a formal structure, if you will, legal structure, which is currently named in a very snazzy way, the post-transition IANA, PTI. We didn't run a competition for the name, maybe we should have, maybe we still can. And the idea is that there is a contract between effectively this IANA entity and the board, relationship, but it's a subsidiary relationship. And then what really replaces the NTIA is two committees formed by the stakeholder community, a sort of day-to-day operational committee, the customer standing committee, which will have ongoing relationships with the IANA to check day-to-day performance, resolve day-to-day service issues and complaints, but then the ability for a more formal grouping, the IANA functions review, to review systemic problems and escalate them and sort them out, and conduct regular reviews every 3 years to see how the performance is working and whether changes or improvements need to be made. So that's just really a zoom onto an illustration of how the main contract will be replaced. There were a couple of other relationships, especially in relation to numbers and protocols. These were dealt with in relation to the numbering community, that's at the top there of this chart, and then with the protocol parameters, which are standards designed by the Internet Engineering Task Force standards community. And so these two relationships feed into this post-transition IANA setup that I just showed you, but they are handled through a memorandum of understanding for the IETF and and another MOU with the numbering community together with a service level agreement. So that's a bit more of a complex picture, but that's basically how the whole setup looks in one illustration. And so these are the proposals which were finalized by the community in October, actually at the ICANN Dublin meeting. Then the other track, the accountability track, the governance track, finalized its work at the ICANN meeting in Marrakesh in March, and with some major improvements, in particular the creation of fundamental bylaws, which really require clear adherence by the vast majority of the community in order to be changed or amended. Inclusion or clarification of certain bylaws, for instance, a clarification of ICANN's respect for human rights, how that would work. There were improvements in terms of appeals mechanisms within the ICANN system, in particular the independent review panel, which can review board decisions, for instance. New measures to keep the ICANN board of directors accountable, including in the worst case scenarios, the ability, for instance, to remove a board director or to even dismiss the whole board in case of insatisfaction in terms of how the IANA function is being handled and governance associated to it, and a further 5 community powers relating, for instance, to how the community can review and improve effectively strategic, operational, and budgetary plans for ICANN. So quite an important further improvement to ICANN's governance. I think it's important to put it in place in the 18 years of ICANN's life. This is the 3rd major organizational reform. So this is an organization which is used to evolving on a fairly continuous basis. I think it will continue to do so. This is the nature of the model. As the internet grows and evolves, we need to evolve the model of governance and continuously improve it. So this is a really high level, really quick presentation. There's a lot more detail I could go into, but I think I will probably stop here maybe just with a quick look at where we're at now, which is the proposal was submitted on the 10th of March this year. So global consultation, and when you think that it's one of the first global consultations ever on something which is quite complex, it was a major exercise. I didn't show you the detail, but there were hundreds of participants from all over the world, from very different stakeholder groups, very strong European input. I note there's around 30% of the participants were European. Many of the leadership positions of the various working groups were held by Europeans. And so it was an impressive global process. We're now in the period of review. Just had a report coming from the NTIA yesterday indicating its positive outlook on the proposals. And the current contract with the NTIA finishes on the 30th of September. So there's further checks and discussions that are happening over the summer. But hopefully, we're looking to have the contract finishing in September. And it was so long that you won't have the opportunity to ask any questions from your audience unless in the next 2 seconds. That's it.
Just one comment. Good luck.
So sorry, timing didn't help. We would have had you on for the whole session, but we were a bit messed up. But still, there's still a few of us. You can ask us the difficult questions.
Okay.
Stefano.
The main news that we learned yesterday is that NTIA said, okay, the plan is satisfactory for us, but the real point is what's next from now until 30th of September. There are still conditions that could put at risk the transition. This is something very important to elaborate, because this problem is considered a major political move. Although for the users, maybe the changement will not be perceived, because actually NTIA role was a secretarial role de facto. So
yes. I think that's a very important point you made at the end, which is for the end user, it should not result in any changes. The internet will, continue to work at its most underlying level. So what's happening now? So within ICANN, we've got work to do, because there's a number of things to implement as part of the proposals. That's already started. So for instance, I mentioned bylaws, which have been amended. So that's already been started. There was a consultation period, which just ended a few days ago on the new bylaws. So we have to implement those. There's been some minor technical changes, because for instance, if you now have a community rather than the NTIA, having to exchange data in relation to IANA performance, then we needed to tweak the software so that they could have access to performance statistics, etc. So it sounds a bit boring, but frankly, a lot of the IANA work is boring. Important one, but so all these implementations need to happen. So that's what's happening in the background, and so we need to be in a position by the time that the contract expires when we can say and show that we're ready, pretty much. That basically we have done the implementation work, we're ready to go on day 0, if you will, or day 1, and the changes have been made. Then so the NTA continues to monitor that, making sure that we're on track, that if indeed, as hoped, the contract lapses on the 30th of September, that on the 1st of October, the internet will still work, to put it in a very crude, very simplified manner. And of course, what we have, the picture here is not the NTIA office on phase 2. It's supposed to represent Congress in the US. The United States Congress has asked to review the proposal. They've had already a couple of hearings as part of this formal review. I think they're going to have one in July, I think next. And they do not have a sort of formal power over this, but it is a normal democratic parliament, and so it has a number of powers, and it has to. Their views have to be respected. So we can't prejudge their views, and so there is still the possibility that they might raise important questions. It's very difficult to say at this stage whether they would. The hope, the expectation, especially now that we have a very positive NTIA report, is that Congress should see that indeed it meets all the proposal meets the criteria and it should go ahead. But we still have all this to do. On the 15th of August, I think Barry will correct me on the detail, but I think 15th of August, ICANN are supposed to issue a report basically outlining the implementation progress, precisely to show that we're ready. And then hopefully, then it's a process of terminating the contract.
So may I ask you just a bit to close? So in August, we will know by sure if the contract will be discontinued or not.
When I was much younger, I used to play a lot of tennis, and one of the things I used to love at tennis is that until the very last point, you don't know who's going to win the game. So that's all I'm saying. Unique to tennis as well. Sorry? Unique to tennis as well. So I don't know, Nigel or Michael, if you want to add anything on that. But I'd say, we have to be patient. I'm not going to uncork champagne today.
Oh, yeah.
Is that a vodka? Or?
Yeah, I think you did a very astute description of the political process in Washington. You navigated that nicely. Yeah, maybe some of our French colleagues with long memories could brief us on how cohabitation works in the legislature. But that's not my main point on that. But first of all, as I've already said, this is overdue and extremely welcome. Secondly, I hope you're right that it will be neutral and transparent to the final user. But I do notice that in the light of the way in which the transition has been negotiated among the various parties, costs have been high. And I think the structure that has been created risks being unnecessarily costly in order to achieve the ostensible results. Some of the ostensible results are what I would call reserve powers, powers that nobody really hopes will ever be used.
Yeah.
But the cost of the infrastructure of those reserve powers is not negligible. And finally, I think I'm glad that you reminded us that ICANN goes through reforms every few years, because this is a major reform. It's been documented in incredible detail. The new bylaws are 215 pages long. The chapter on the enhanced empowered community is 40 pages long of American legalese. That has never been tested. There is nothing like it in the world. And I am quite convinced that after a few years of experience with this, there will be calls for some simplification and further reform. Not least because the powers that have been granted and removed from the GAC, from the governments, are clear if you read it in detail. But how it will work out in practice is problematic. First, it's only clear in the detail if you listen to the participants in the negotiation. And secondly, I'm quite sure, and I'm the secretary of the GAC for several years and the European member of the GAC for years before that, I'm quite sure there are a large number of governments and interested partners in governments who have no idea what has been agreed in the transition as far as the GAC is concerned, but this will all come out in the wash in the next year or two.
I could comment, but I think I'd say certainly we will continue to raise awareness, and there's a lot of need for that. We've done over 1,000 different events over the past 2 years as ICANN staff to try and raise awareness and encourage people to contribute all over the world. So we've tried, but we know there's more. But rather than answer myself or comment on the points that you made, I wonder if anyone wants to react or follow up on Christopher's points. I think that.
Yeah, please. First of all, I think what I would like to do is to go on record to say that the effort and the time and the resources placed on this over the last couple of years has been outstanding. The man or woman hours that have been spent in terms of also the volunteering, not only those that have been costed, is a testament to what the community can do. But I would like us to all be maybe good students of history. The purpose of the transition, and I've said that in numerous conversations in public and in private, the purpose of the transition, if you want to call it the transition, was to convince those who don't belong to this parish to believe in this parish. It was not just purely to convince the current parishioners that this church is good, for lack of a better term. My concern is that the good faith and the great effort that has been done is phenomenal, and I think that's definitely to be leveraged. The outcome is in nobody's hand except in Congress and in the US, in how the recommendations are going to be received by whether it's the current administration or the future administration, whoever that's going to be. And that's a political thing that we can't control. And at the end, what I see is that we've created structures, we've created mechanisms, but as you mentioned earlier on, we may discover that there's going to be a lot of refining to make the outsiders believe that this process and this transition is of value to them to buy into it. And I caution on this.
Okay, I mean, on an informal basis, I mean, I thought that the transition was mainly to have so many conference calls that we could help the mobile industry make loads of profits. But
that too as well.
No, I mean, I think that I'm sure others in the room, I know others in the room have got views, especially because some of you have worked very hard on this themselves and they'll know why they wanted it. I don't think it was, just people from inside the ICANN community that wanted to show the rest of the world something. I think there were genuine desires and sometimes concerns to make sure that there was good, strong governance in ICANN and the right, especially good governance checks and balances in there. And I think Christopher's right that probably and indeed hopefully we will never use 90% of the measures and mechanisms that have been put in place. But the idea was that they did a lot of scenario testing and a lot of worst case scenario testing, and I thought, okay, well, if this and goes wrong, how can we make sure we can redress it, we can improve it? And so if you look at the detail, you've got a huge escalation path with maybe up to 10 or so steps up to various nuclear options. And hopefully we'll never go beyond the one or two. And in fact, when you speak to some of the registries who are the day-to-day customers of the IANA function, most of them said, oh, it's working very well. And we probably, a few years ago, maybe it wasn't at the beginning, but now it's working very well. All the changes are being made quickly, etc., etc. So we shouldn't have to use all these powers, but they are there. We have yet to test them. It'll take time, but I think I would. I think it's certainly the feeling I got. As staff, I try to remain neutral, and so I was looking and listening to many of the contributors. I think it was very much, the people inside the ICANN community wanted to make sure that it was working well, not for external show, but for themselves to make sure that it was robust and they could exercise.
I don't doubt that at all. I think that's 100% correct. But we always talk about the white elephant in the room. The NTIA's decision to go and announce that they want to transition was directly related to the Snowden revelation. Let's not beat around the bush. So the fact of the matter, that's a political decision, and then we ended up working on implementation of what the best thing that we can come up with, and we did. Now, does that, in my book, that's the question I ask, and time will determine, is what we have accomplished enough to convince the outside parishioners? That's a different story. There's no question, and this is why I stated at the beginning, the credit to the good faith and the effort by the community is 1,000%. There's no question about that. But let's see what happens.
I think there's a lot of reactions there. So Olivier first, or is it from the chat?
Yeah, thanks, Jean-Jacques. It's Olivier speaking. And there's someone in the chat. Turn it off. There's James Gannon actually following us remotely, who mentions that the proposal is long due to the comprehensiveness of it, not due to being in legalese or filler. It's in depth and it covers things in details. And on implementation, we have implementation groups in place for exactly that reason. And he also mentions that, Jean-Jacques, you have a very good point. He joined ICANN and the IANA transition to make sure it was not going to be just an insider effort and to provide the oversight of non-ICANN people. And he was not alone in doing this. So,
thanks for that.
I think that's a really important point. ICANN has often been sort of criticised for being rather a closed community. This work, which we are asked to facilitate, I mean, I think showed that the broader community had an input into this process, which I think is critical. And without this diversity of views, the result would not be as it was. So, yeah, we're very fortunate that people attend this. gave their talents and their free time and their efforts.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if I should say this. Hey, hello. Because, well, of course, I think it is controversial. About 100% of approval of this proposal is in the community. I know that parts of the community are not happy and they're advocating against transition. And I think that this is a sad thing as well, because we were working together, but we couldn't apparently make everyone happy. So it's not only about convincing the outside community, convincing the Congress that this proposal is good. It's also about that parts of the community that can actually influence the outcome outside or not happy. And we have to take this into account as well. And I do hope that this proposal gets through. But it is hard to say how these mechanisms will function. I mean, as Jean-Jacques told them, as we are all saying, maybe 90% of them they're not going to apply, hopefully. And it's hard to convince people who never took part in this process that we are not going to apply them, that they're just checks and balances. So it's a bit more controversial than just convincing the outside world that it's going to work. It's also still convincing our community that it's going to work.
No names, but there are certainly some of the lobby participants are concerned that globalization leads to dilution of the American control. And explicitly, letters signed by Mr. Cruz, that they're against the transition which opens the governments beyond the United States. I think that's a minority view. It will not succeed, particularly if we have another Democratic administration, but it's certainly that.
Okay, others, please do not hesitate. Don't be shy.
Few remarks are this, that ICANN had the different steps in his life, and the community, external community that wanted to know what is this strange animal that was ICANN at the beginning, I could say multiplied by 10 at least when the new GTLD started in 2011. And when we started discussing about the IANA transition, multiplied even more and involved the politicians going to the top, because the fact that with the transition, US government renounced to something that could be considered an asset of US, this was very, very sensible. So, but in the end, we hope that the process will go into realm, and then the problem is that for some people, external people, we enter in a foggy area, because no one is sure what will happen if we work appropriately. And for example, also the possibility of substituting the whole board is something that is maybe exaggerated, to my opinion, if the government thinks that is a good idea, because ICANN needs to go on, needs to have a decision-making mechanism that functions, otherwise will die, let's say, or the only way is to enter into ITU or other organizations that is not something that the community likes at all. So this occasion it has also involved accountability, means legitimation of what ICANN does. And this is something that the people don't understand so much. So we enter in this foggy area, we have to work properly, and little by little, we need maybe 3, 4, 5 years before that the system is stable again. Thank you.
Anyone else? Another voice? You're all super convinced by what you've just heard.
No, we are not. That it's silent and not
Yeah, rather than they just.
At the risk of speaking again, I will change the subject. First of all, you introduced this as the IANA transition, but the big piece of work that is still ongoing is the ICANN accountability call and the work stream 2 work, which starts in Helsinki on the 26th of
sort of pre-started. Yeah.
Includes subjects like the accountability of the supporting organizations themselves. And I think that's very important because it's easier to capture the supporting organization than to capture the ICANN board. And the responsibilities of ICANN to respect human rights. Which human rights? Over what scope? With the 800 pages coming out of the Council of Europe, is that going to land on the working group's table for human rights in ICANN? I don't think so. There's an enormous amount of work in addition to the implementation of the IANA.
For because we didn't have enough time and it didn't include too much detail on work stream 2, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of work that's going to happen on the framework for interpretation on human rights, how ICANN should look at human rights issues within its mandate, what's the process to take into account as part of policy development processes in ICANN. There will be very important discussions around diversity at ICANN, for instance, geographic, gender, other. So there's plenty.
Jurisdiction.
Tanya, you're going to be very involved. So go on. You should please.
No, it just.
There's going to be a lot. And so this is work which is, so it's called work stream 2 for accountability, which meant there needed to be a review of governance and checks and balances, accountability, specifically in relation to the IANA transition. But it was felt very strongly by the community that there should be a wider exercise that go beyond the IANA functions only and look at ICANN as a whole. And so there's more work going on there, just for those that may not be aware. That's what's going to happen over the next few months. So it's a very wide-ranging reform. Wolfgang, please.
This brings me to my favorite proposal that we have, if we talk about the future. We have to have a vision for what I call ICANN 2025 and a work stream 3. Because what we are doing now is more or less rooted in the IANA transition with accountability. But sooner or later, after all the reviews which has been done in ICANN, we have to reconsider also whether the structure we have established 20 years ago, 15 years ago, does still fit into the needs of the next 10 years. So with the opportunity now to concentrate on its core business, names and numbers, I think ICANN has to reconsider whether the as a pioneering organization for the multi-stakeholder model, whether it has the right definition for stakeholders in itself. So what I see a number of conflicts which has to be settled is so then the civil society or the user or are recognized as a stakeholder group. In ICANN, so we have an invisible conflict between the non-commercial stakeholder group in the GNSO and the at-large advisory group. The at-large advisory group, Olivier itself, made this very clear. It's not only individual users, it also includes the users from small business users. But it means we need a clarification, what are the stakeholders, what is the role of the private sector. We have clarified now the role of the governments. We have to look clearer into the role of the civil society or the user. So nobody has an answer for the moment, but the structure has to be reconsidered after workstream 2 has finished. So this is not ICANN 2020, this is ICANN 2025. So it's a long-term perspective, but we should be aware that more work has to be done in the future.
I was starting to wonder what job I could do after 2020, so thanks for that. Any reactions to this? Thank you. Or
Any suggestions?
also suggestions? Or
I'm also an international lawyer. When considering the human rights regimes, it's easy to say that ICANN should respect it, but then that's role it's plays in the whole regimes of human rights. Would be then a member of the European Convention on Human Rights or in the Back 2 of the United Nations, their complaint mechanism, their report mechanism, all this, and we've no answer to that.
well, there's already been quite a bit of discussion. You've got next to you one of the people that's been the most vocal on it, and that's exactly the sort of questions that we'll go into in detail in this work stream too. Please,
Well,
Tanya.
actually, I can answer. I mean, if you're talking about Universal Declaration of Human Rights or any other conventions, treaties, they're mostly for the states. They create actually no obligation for ICANN. So we cannot really refer to them directly. We can refer to them only in terms of substance. What are human rights? Which human rights we have to respect? The duty to respect human rights, it includes, like, we were trying to limit it because we didn't want ICANN to become a watchdog, for example, to regulate the content. And it's limited by two provisions. First of all, it's in the bylaw, that it doesn't create any obligation to enforce human rights. And secondly, it's in the mission limitation that ICANN is not going to regulate. And concerning the framework of interpretation, it's not like a framework which will actually refer to Universal Declaration of Human Rights or to any commitments like this. It's rather about what does it mean for ICANN to respect human rights? Which human rights we are impacting the most? Which instruments we are going to use? Because there are plenty of instruments already developed, like human rights impact assessment for businesses, human rights corporate and social responsibility policies. So there are plenty of instruments, and there are plenty of them. And of course, ICANN is unique in this sense. So the group, the work stream 2 group, is going to look at this, look at different practices, and then just to develop some framework for ICANN, which will be referring to internal policies. So I don't see any dichotomies or difficulties here, except that there are different stakeholders, and it's a group exercise. So we are going to have lots of fights. For example, but seriously, intellectual property constituency is copyright a human right. What is ICANN is going to do with this? Is this or that human right? Where do we impact the most, and what it does it mean to respect? So I don't know if this answers your question.
So just one comment on that. Policy-wise, it's fine, yeah. But in the end, there would be then some ICANN and responsibility of ICANN for human rights would be then checked by one government. And that's referring to one of human rights courts. That's the problem, you say, because there's some lacuna then there. If the rule is checked by one human rights court, one of them.
I am going to reply. If the ICANN is checked by any of the by the virtue of any complaint to any human rights court, I don't know which court you're referring to, European Court of Human Rights or whatever, it would be rather enforcement process within the applicable law, not within the ICANN frameworks. There is no mechanism to check actually internal frameworks. It's a voluntary obligation. But if ICANN is going to be involved in slavery, for example, of course it would be checked, but this is the question of applicable law, which ICANN has to respect in any case.
I think if I can, we need to close shortly. What I would just say, I think it's useful actually to have started the discussion and there's coffee, so you can continue for a while. But I would just, it's useful to make the point. All this work stream 2, is completely open. So you can take part in the participation or simply observe. You can go, I think I've got a slide, just to remind everyone to look at all the details. So especially it'll be now on accountability. We've got huge archives, budget announcements for what's coming up, where you can follow the next discussion, participate in the next discussion. So, and as you can hear, not everything is settled. You have the opportunity to contribute further to all this work on the wider ICANN accountability. And then the ICANN.org/stewardship, you'll have a lot of the material that I've just presented to you in much more detail. and you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and in the corridors of EuroDIG. If you want to reach us directly, don't hesitate. You can just send an email to europe@ican.org. You can get to me directly, and to my colleagues in Europe. Don't hesitate. Thank you very, very much for that. I know I'll see many of you in our next big meeting, which is in Helsinki in 2 weeks' time. So I look forward to seeing many of you there. And in the meantime, enjoy the second wonderful day of EuroDIG and the sunshine in Brussels. Thank you.